I'm on social media, and I'm like, this is not healthy for me. And so at that time, I had the fortitude to take that Facebook app that was on my home screen and swipe and remove it. And I was like, okay, I'm relieved. I'm turning off the world for now because it's not a healthy place to be. But then 10 minutes later, I go and swipe into my phone, and I automatically pressed in that empty space where the Facebook app used to be. And it infuriated me because I'm like, oh my gosh, I have been socially programmed. I've been engineered and I think I'm somewhat of a disciplined individual as an adult now. But when that happened to me, I was enraged because they've created an algorithm that's so powerful that it can take the most disciplined adult to go and get programmed and engineered to that's the first thing they select every time, unconsciously. And then I just realized that we're taking this and we're just handing it to little kids.
Anchored is a production of the Classic Learning Test, based in Annapolis, Maryland, reconnecting knowledge and virtue through meaningful assessments. Visit us at cltexam.com/get-started.
Welcome back to the Anchored Podcast, the official podcast of the Classic Learning Test. My name is Soren Schwab, VP of Partnerships here at CLT, and today we're joined by Terry Gromes. Terry is the founder of the Canary Project, an initiative that helps families and schools build healthier, more intentional relationships with technology in the age of screens. As a strategist and consultant who has spent over a decade working at the intersection of product development, organizational growth, and the human side of innovation, he brings a practical, conversation-driven approach to the question of how digital tools shape our attention, emotions, and relationships. Through the Canary Project, Terry designed simple, short-term experiments and challenges that help parents, educators, and communities become more aware of their screen habits and rediscover focus, emotional regulation, and face-to-face presence. His work appears in Christian-oriented media and podcasts, where he and his wife Danielle framed the project as a way of reclaiming children's formation when attention is constantly pulled toward devices and algorithms. Underlying his efforts is a clear conviction. Technology should serve the human person rather than shape the human person, a vision he seeks to live out both in his public speaking and in his own family. And it's an absolute honor to have him on the podcast today. Terry, welcome.
Good to be here.
Absolutely. I mean, I am just so thrilled. We're using Riverside. We're having these fancy mics. We're using technology to talk about, are we using technology too much? So I cannot wait for this conversation. We love the tension, right?
Totally. Absolutely. You can feel it in the air.
That's right. Well, let's dig in. And as our core audience knows, we always start the Anchored podcast by talking about our guest's own educational background. I know you're talking to us from Canton, Ohio. I think that's where you grew up. Talk a little bit about K-12 education in Canton, Ohio.
Totally. So my experience was kind of unique growing up. Just as a practicing Catholic, we had our local parish that we participated in, the local communities, the youth groups, the book clubs, Bible studies, the whole thing. My early education took a pivot around, I believe it was second grade, when my mother decided she wanted to homeschool us, and that did not come from a spiritual position as much as it was the collective growth versus the individual growth. And so she saw an opportunity for us to develop at a higher pace than within a classroom of 30, where a teacher's attention is segmented towards all these students. So me and my three sisters, yes, I'm the only boy, we were homeschooled at an early age, and that's where I was first introduced to the classic arts. My mother taught us Latin and Greek at a very high level to understand, like what philia means and things like that. And so introducing that at a very early age helped set a very firm foundation for when I went into public school when I went back into it in high school. I had this formation that was instilled through the key delivering institutions, which is the family, the faith, and the school.
Yeah, did your mom, was she one of those, I'm just going to pick my own homeschool curriculum, use a little bit here, a little bit there, or were you part of like a Catholic homeschool kind of co-op program?
A little bit of both. Back in that day, it's we were the hipsters of homeschool. We were doing it before it was cool. Now it's like, the rad thing to do. Back then, my mom did have an education background, so she was able to put together a very core curriculum, but we did participate in other groups and we did some really cool things. Like one of the programs we did was mapping the world by heart, and it's literally in the name. Like we sat down in this multi-week curriculum, and we sat down each time and we like learned where Cairo, Egypt is on the longitudinal and latitudinal lines. We learned how to compare the size of Spain to the state of Texas, and and understand where the world is, and long term results was we did literally get a blank map and we drew the entire world by heart, learning the capitals, the geographical location. So I mean, that was one of the things that I don't feel like I would have ever been introduced to in a public school system. And I don't think we're going to sit here and knock the public school system entirely, but it's just like that's one of something that I felt should be foundational for the education system to implement. And I just feel like that was something very unique that I was introduced to through homeschooling that I would not have seen in a public system. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's that formation is different, right? And again, it's not necessarily just a knock. It's just it's different. I don't know exactly how old you are, Terry. My assumption is you're a millennial. Is that right? Okay, so we're both. I'm at kind of the tail end there. And so let's talk a little bit about that. Kind of your upbringing. What role did technology play? I mean, we didn't grow up with a smartphone, right? I'm assuming you have one now. Kind of talk to me a little bit about that. Even going through college, what that experience was like, kind of with technology.
Absolutely, and I think there's a stark contrast. Even though like we're just butting up with like the new generations, like we share the same world with them. Growing up, we did have TVs, we had technology, we had computers, but we had a big old box TV 4:3 ratio in the living room. We had channels 3, 5, and 8. We would watch the 9 a.m. Looney Tunes while the parents cooked breakfast. I mean, the technology was always a part of our upbringing, but and the same with the computer. When that was introduced, we had dial up. We had a big bulky PC sitting in the living room, and we all shared it. It was in a public space, and we would get kicked off by my mom always being like, "Hey, I'm waiting for a call," and I'm like, "No, you're not, Mom." She's like, "Go outside and play." And so that's the key difference. We went outside and played, and when we went, we couldn't take our technology with us. And so there's always that isolation, that divide of what the technology world is and then what the real world is. And now, you know, without getting into what we do too much, it's just that world has been eroded where that little rectangle, that glowing rectangle in your pocket, it literally goes with you everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good. I mean, I made it through college without a smartphone. I did have a laptop. And obviously it was around the time Facebook
Mm-hmm.
started, right? But yeah, I mean, it is
Yeah.
such a stark contrast now to like my nephews. Like that's all they know. That's the waters they swim in.
Hmm.
I like the point of you mentioned that isolation. You're right. It was this go out to play essentially meant unplug, like go out.
Unplugged.
And
Yep.
now go out to play usually means with that rectangular thing in your pocket, kind of going
Yeah. Yeah.
out to play. Um, I guess kind of on a bigger picture, right? And you received this beautiful education, and in the classical where we talk so much about kind of the ordered soul, right, and cultivating our loves and all these things, right? And so, but then you have this modern attention economy, right? Whether
Hmm.
it's short form videos, scrolling, algorithm feeds, like dopamine rushes and hits. Uh, uh, just kind of on a big picture, how does that challenge kind of that classical ideal of an ordered soul, and kind of our attention and disciplined focus?
Yeah, I think it challenges the ordered soul because I mean, at the foundation of that, it falls on virtue and it falls on peace. And like, if you can't have that, the peace of your soul, um, that's not what social media, that's not what technology is demanding of you these days. Like where we have other tools, other technologies in our life, these algorithms and these screens, they constantly demand our attention, and they constantly get those results because in return the user receives that constant dopamine hit. But that doesn't bring peace to the soul. It constantly keeps them interactive. It constantly keeps them searching for more. They never get that answer they're looking for. They never like it results in anxiety, which is, I mean, the opposite of peace. So it's really counterproductive when if if that's the goal that you're searching for, technology is not where you should seek it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's one of those things where I mean, even I find myself sometimes, am I being hypocritical, right? Am I
Yeah.
patronizing, right? Because we all use, I
Hmm.
mean, like you just said, we're using technology right now. I have a smartphone, right? All these things. Uh, I do think the last few years, the conversation has changed a little bit. And obviously some of the great work that you're doing, we're going to talk about the Canary Project here in a minute. But I think, and that's just my guess, kind of 50 years looking back. Uh, I think Jonathan Haidt's The Next Generation
Hmm.
gonna be looked upon as probably one of the most important foundational,
Totally.
books written in our kind of generation. I'm assuming you read that book. Was that when you read it? Was that one of those like I knew that, and now there's
Yeah.
some data
Yeah.
behind it? Was that kind of your experience?
So yeah, if you move back one book prior, he wrote a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. And yeah, and so it was like correlation versus causation. He's like, these are some of the things we're seeing. We've been on the social medias and the technologies long enough. Like, is this causation or correlation? And then Anxious Mind comes out. He's like, ha, it is. It's causation. This is really what's happening. Like, we can really point to this time and really see that these are the outcomes based off of technology. And honestly, that's where the Canary Project name comes from. It's the canary in the coal mine. And if you're familiar with the saying, when the coal miner would go into the mine, there was a risk that they would be exposed to, unseeable dangers, the fumes that were toxic in the air. So they took the canaries down there with them, and the canaries would warn them if there's toxic fumes in the air. And by doing that, the coal miners were able to, save their lives by removing themselves from that harmful environment, that unseeable danger that they couldn't detect. And that's where the name comes from, because we can now identify what was previously the undetectable danger. And so now that we see it, like, let's do something about it.
I I love that story and I love that name. I mean,
Thanks.
that is such a, yeah, yeah. You got to tell me kind of what the origin story. I mean, how did you come up with the name? Was that a story that you were familiar with? Was that something you saw? Talk to us a little bit, and then obviously mention like what is the Canary Project? How long has it been around? I know you founded it, but give us a little bit of the origin story there.
Well, the story is kind of hilarity in my mind, because I spent almost the past 20 years in industrial robotics. So might seem like quite a career pivot to go from industrial robotics to speaking towards technology. But I mean, that was my role in our position within our own industry. So I was essentially hired to observe other technologies within the world and that were developing at such a huge rate. And then it was our job to find how there may be opportunities to integrate them into our rugged, caustic environments, because we're working in the energy sector, we're working with the DoD, like we're doing a lot of uh, projects that these tools, these robotics need to perform tasks repeatably, reliably, etc. And so when Steve Jobs introduced the iPad, I was like, ooh, that's something. That's what, 2011, 2012. And so we as a company, we pivoted very quickly to integrate um, the touchscreens devices to control all of our products, our entire product line, wirelessly through Bluetooth. And so as we integrated screen devices into our product line, we also looked at some of the safety hazards that may result if a user turned on the machine through the device, set the device down, and walked away. And so we went through a series of like research and implementing new ideas on how to make sure the end user was always in contact with that device, always giving their attention to that screen. And so we looked at things like we patented a button on the screen. So if they let go with their thumb, it would turn off. We looked at facial recognition, the accelerometer, and how the device is moving. But I do bring that up because that was our priority, to keep people connected with that screen device in its entire time. And so we also looked at how other people were doing it as well. And that's what had us stumble upon the algorithm that Instagram and Facebook and TikTok use. and we saw that, we're like, little nefarious. We're not gonna travel down that path. And so that was always that tension was always in the back of my head, a little bit of, wow, that's taking it a little bit to the next level. And then fast forward to COVID, still at the same company, still developing technology. And then, the economy shuts down. We're all isolated. The world's going crazy. It's so polarizing. And I'm on social media, and I'm like, this is not healthy for me. And so at that time, I had the fortitude to take that Facebook app that was on my home screen and swipe and remove it. And I was like, okay, I'm relieved. I'm turning off the world for now because it's not a healthy place to be. But then 10 minutes later, I go and swipe into my phone, and I automatically pressed in that empty space where the Facebook app used to be. And it infuriated me because I'm like, oh my gosh, I have been socially programmed. I've been engineered, and I think I'm somewhat of a disciplined individual as an adult now. But when that happened to me, I was enraged because they've created an algorithm that's so powerful that it can take the most disciplined adult to go and get programmed and engineered that's the first thing to select every time, unconsciously. And then I just realized that we're taking this and we're just handing it to little kids that don't have a formed prefrontal cortex. They don't have any discipline. They don't have any rationality. I mean, they're not matured in their minds and their mindsets. And it's like, so this is really something we need to monitor. And then, of course, shortly after that, Jonathan Haidt, I'm like, wow, this just can't be a thing that's like left unnoticed. Like we have to take up some space in this arena and start sharing this information with other people.
Wow, that's absolutely fascinating, and I think a lot of us have a little bit of emotional PTSD right now, just thinking thinking back to that time, because I think we all
Yeah,
experienced it,
yeah.
right? Some way, shape, or form. And I just recently said goodbye to X or Twitter or whatnot, and
Really?
I did the opposite. I did, and I feel so much better. Um,
Totally.
Even though there's a little bit of FOMO, right? Because that's part of our program. Like, what
Mm-hmm.
am I missing out on? I'm missing,
Mm-hmm.
anyways. I
Totally.
was actually the one. I joined Twitter during COVID, which was probably the worst thing. So I did the opposite that you did. You got off of it, and I actually got on it during that time. Um, y- y- Talk to me a little bit about those early indicators, right? That you felt that I'm sure a lot of people, maybe even children, feel, like attention span, emotional regulation, relational habits. I mean, when you talk to parents, and I know you talk to schools as well, uh, uh, what are some of those early indicators that really that end up turning into those habits that you just mentioned? Like, if you're just thinking, I don't want to even get to that point, how would you talk to a parent or a school about those?
Totally. I think we have a map we call the digital divergence map. And on the top of the map, we have a linear plane that shows the traditional upbringing of a child. From its early infant stage, the people that are invested in their life are mostly their parents, but at an early age, they are introduced to um, just the local community, the close household, the immediate family, but also they're starting to be introduced to faith, and that's an early implementation into the traditional household. As they grow into toddlers, youth, they get introduced to the school system, and all these things are the support structure behind their upbringing. So then, as they gain autonomy into their teens and ultimately into their adulthood, the local community pulls in and supports them. They have mentors through education or athletics. You don't want to discount that one either. And so that's how we've seen childhood development happen for such a long time. And then this digital divergence is right at that space where that child gains enough, I don't know, independence to become problematic or to need more attention. And that's where the divergence happens. And like we said, we're talking about when we were growing up, totally watched Looney Tunes and played on the computer, Nintendos, all those things. But like there was a clear defining time where we separated ourselves so we weren't distracted and we were fully present in the world. And some of that was the result of going to a book club, going outside to play, entering into sports, which we're seeing a massive decline with these newer generations. All these communal activities or rituals that we would participate in have been totally eradicated, because at that early stage, um, the parent, the babysitter, the mentor is replaced by that screen. And that's problematic because these children are looking, they're always watching, they always need a mentor. And if the parent or the teacher or that person who's raising them is not fully present in their life, they are going to look somewhere else. And the internet is not the place to go look for that. But unfortunately, that's the result that we're seeing. And that detour from the traditional life is where those habits start forming, where they lean to their phone for that dopamine rush because they can't get interactions with the adults surrounding them. They live on the internet, they create friends through the internet. It consumes them, and then it's just, with the undeveloped prefrontal cortex, it creates that dopamine hit that they don't know how to regulate. And it also, like any bad habit, you build up resistance and you build up a tolerance, and you need more and you need more. And next thing you know, you see a teenager that cannot make eye contact, that doesn't have any social skills, that can't hold a job or communicate properly. And so it's very clear to us that the substitution of the screen for the traditional methods of mentorship and child raising is where those bad habits really formulate.
Wow. I mean, and again, we're and I think you guys are doing such a good job not feeling like, again, you're just judging. How can you? How can you? How could you possibly do that to your child, right? Like, there's a way you go about this that is really, kind of side by side looking at this. What are some of these signs? What are some of the things? And I guess if you could maybe speak to some of the quote unquote blind spots, where, because I do think that a lot of families are really trying. They're doing their absolute best. They want, of course they do. They want the best for their kids, but maybe we're parents or even teachers kind of assume, no, we're in control. Like we got this, right? We're setting some boundaries, right? But technology is actually quietly changing, right? Their children's desires, their friendships, their even their sense of self. And when that happens, do you see kind of a pattern of those blind spots with folks?
Yes, and to speak to the one comment prior, I think it's very important to note that we're all canaries in the coal mine, right? We were all given these
Yeah,
devices
that's right.
and introduced to this digital world really without our consent. And like we all lived there for a decade plus, and so now we just have it's kind of like, I don't know, the argument for lead paint or asbestos. It was totally just thrown into our world, and then we realized, like, oh, now we have lymphoma. Maybe we shouldn't do this anymore. And so that's really where we're all at right now with technology. So like you said, I believe that parents inherently want what's best for their children. They always want a better world than the world they grew up in. And so to be technology forward, there's a ton of benefits. That's why we're not anti-technology. We love technology. It's not about going on a phone fast, or, if you want to switch back to a flip phone, that's your prerogative. But like, how do we coexist with this technology? How do we recreate a framework and a structure and boundaries on how we can coexist and find a balance of technology and human presence? So when we speak to parents, there's no guilt trip going on, because I believe that if they knew better, they would have chosen a different path. And that's why we feel like it's so important to have public speaking engagements, to be there and be supportive of parents as they navigate this tricky path. And that's where, leading into the original question you just asked, some of those blind spots are like, think of it this way. Like, when we grew up, we were taught to identify harms within society. The van that had no windows trying to give us candy. We had DARE programs to teach us about drugs. We tried to stay away from the creepy guy in the public bathroom wearing a trench coat. Like, all these indicators that we had growing up, those do exist still, but they don't exist as prevalent as they did in our age of growing up. We live in the safest society that's ever existed if you compare it historically to the existence of society, but we are not regulating any of these opportunities for these same bad actors to access children through the internet. And so Jonathan Haidt was credited with saying children are overprotected in the real world and underprotected online. And so when you actually fully grasp what these children have access to, then the conversation starts to pivot. I guess an example would be like, okay, dad is putting 16-year-old Grayson down to bed, or like at least saying goodnight to him. It's not like he has to tuck in a 16-year-old, but dad comes in, takes a stack of Playboys, just puts them on the table right next to the son and says, "Good night, Grayson. I'm just going to set these here, but I trust that you won't be curious and you're disciplined enough to not start exploring through these Playboys." What's the reality of that situation? And then when you compare that to what they have access to through their cell phones, it does create a different lens to look at how this cell phone should be part of these children's lives as they're being raised.
What are kind of on the practical side, and you guys do kind of canary experiments. Can you talk a little bit about those, like, so the canary experience that you've run with families or schools, and I guess doing those, what surprised you about how quickly or slowly kind of habits can form and change?
Yeah. So one of our primary solutions, and again, this is where we're not anti-technology, is we developed a gamified app. And you download that app on your phone and you participate in what we call the Canary Challenge. And so as we've looked back at studies that have been done for habit forming, we found studies that say between the timeline of 45 to 90 days are the window of where you can break an old habit and form a new one. And so it is all about that formation. So we have a challenge that is 60 days on this app. And we may be the only app developers in the world that want you to be on our app less. I think every app developer wants you to spend time on their app. But what we do is we break it down into two sections. It's a 30-day detox period and a 30-day growth period. And with that, you get a morning challenge, which is like a minute to 2 minutes of audio just telling you what task to do. And in the evening, you get an evening reflection. So our goals are to slowly chip away of this iceberg of the social media technology imbalance and reinstall that into a lifestyle that can be healthy. And so what we've seen, even within just the 30-day detox, we're already seeing drops in anxiety, better family balance, a huge awareness of how much people have been using technology, even beyond social media. Even some of the people partaking in our early access program don't even have a Facebook, but then they're still realizing like, oh, I go here a lot to social, or to go on YouTube. I go here a lot to I don't Google whatever they're doing. They're just realizing that like I do spend more time on my phone than I really realized. And so it introduces, and some of the program is just awareness alone, right? It's not even performing a task. And so some of these results that we're seeing are not even including the growth period. And we're very optimistic of how much change can happen within an individual's life, just understanding how much they're actually interacting with that phone. And it helps them um, create their own balance. And I think that's very important to point as well too, is like these experiments, these curriculums that we've created, we're not trying to drive to a universal outcome. I don't think that's realistic, because every household runs their household differently. And that's what we promote. That's what we encourage with parents, to establish that leadership, to create that family culture within their own home. That may not be replicated everywhere else, but it's important for the parents to have, the leadership and the ownership of that space to create that healthy tech balance, that they can be role models to their kids within their own household.
Yeah, I love the way you use tech balance. And some of it, and I know that in my own life too, is one, the awareness, and I do love kind of the, I guess weekly you get your notification and you spend this much time daily on this phone. I'm like, that's a lot. My goodness. So just that awareness that you talked about in that 30-day detox. But then also kind of setting some boundaries. And my wife and I, we've been intentionally kind of talking about like, let's set some boundaries around the things that we do, and like, let's not take our phones to bed, like,
Yeah, totally.
little things like that, right? But it has to be intentional, right? Because we're so conditioned and so programmed to it. What would you say are some of those kind of high leverage boundary practices that parents can implement at home that you think will have kind of the biggest ripple effect on, I guess, on their own and on their children's formation?
Well, I think it's important to note that coming from a development background, like I felt that it was very important and it's very encouraged by my wife that we participate in our own challenge to see its efficacy on us as well too. And even with us going into this, being very mindful of our usage, you know, myself still never downloading that Facebook app ever again, we have still seen drastic improvement in sleep habits by just what you said, just removing the cell phone from the bedroom. 75% of people who own cell phones, the cell phone's the last thing they see before they go to bed and the first thing they see when they wake up. So to establish that hour before bed, to just have that own personal time, to be fully present, read a book, just have a conversation. And then we established the first half hour in the morning to just like collect your thoughts, meditate, pray, read the newspaper, make breakfast, like have that spot of your morning and have that ownership for yourself. Because once you grab that cell phone, as you know, the whole world gets thrown into your day, and it's very hard to turn that off once you turn it on. And so small tasks like that are very important. And I think it's also very important too to point out that by implementing these tasks, it helps establish discipline, and that's a key factor. And I think that's at the intersection of what you guys do at the classic learning test and what we do at the Canary Project is instilling virtue. If you go on a phone fast, it can be effective by just abstinence, but you're not teaching yourself to regulate that dopamine craving. And so when you build discipline and fortitude and put those in place with technology, you can take that virtue and apply it to other aspects in life. And that's more important to us. It's not just only finding a balance of technology, but it's about improving life itself.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's really, really powerful. Talk to me a little bit about school, right? K-12 schools, and I know you work with schools, you work with teachers. There is certainly has been. I mean, a lot of classical schools have been kind of low tech from day one, and I think have been very clear on technology is a tool, not the is a means, right? It's a tool, it's not the end. But there are a lot of schools. Actually, there's a lot of Christian schools, a lot of Catholic schools that are one-to-one schools, right? They do have that. I mean, my nephew just got an iPad because the school requires it.
Mm-hmm.
No, the school requires an iPad. So even if you don't want to, you constantly feel like you have to. Kind of on a hopeful note, I have talked to a lot of schools that have started to implement more intentional tech policies, and really kind of from the ground up, kind of their philosophy of technology and the way they think about it, which I think is fantastic. Um, uh, if a school were to design kind of a Canary style tech policy for students, for staff, what principles would you want them to build into that policy, just beyond kind of simple time limits, like don't spend more than X amount of time? What are some key points there?
So I think that answer is twofold, and because there's two different audiences. One is the student and one is the teacher. I do think that teachers feel overwhelmed when they try to navigate this world of technology and education, and there's more overload on them more than ever trying to monitor these different things. I think that technology is still a tool, and I think that's how it should be approached. Use the tool, don't let the tool use you. So I think the educators are in a unique opportunity that they can have all these resources available digitally. But when you pivot towards the students, there's this great study from the University of Chicago. And what they did is they measured the outcome of middle school students where they sat them at their desk, they placed the cell phone on their desk in front of them. And then they gave them a series of numbers just to memorize and repeat back to the teacher. And so they measured their success with the cell phone right there on the top of the desk. Next test, they placed it inside the desk, out of sight, but still next to the student. Did the exact same test, got different results. And then finally, they took the cell phone and they put it out in the locker room, out in the hall, completely removed from the classroom. Guess which ones the students were more proficient? It was totally when the cell phone was completely removed from the classroom. So Can technology and education coexist? Certainly. But when it comes to that digital distraction, where that cell phone lives within that student's lives, I think that the full presence within the classroom should be the same way that we would want full presence when we go to mass. We don't want distraction. We want to be fully present. And I don't think that children and students can fully grasp. I mean, it's just not my opinion that the data overwhelmingly supports all the education decline since these tools were implemented. And so it's a real conversation to have. And that's why even here for the state of Ohio, we just passed State Senate Bill 158 last year. And so as of January 1st, all public schools have a cell phone ban K through 12. And so you can use your device to come to school, GPS, whatever, but like they don't even get it during lunch. And there is, it might be surprising to a lot of people, but it's been overwhelmingly embraced by the students. They're starting to talk in the hallways again. They're actually sitting down at lunch together. And like in our generation, that was like a ritual that we look forward to. It's the socialization, sitting down and eating a meal together as teenagers. And that has gone away completely in so many spaces. So to reintroduce that social aspect does bring that local community vibe back into the schools again. Now, private schools still are at their own discretion. And so there's conversations to be had there. But still, that's where the Canary Project really comes in, to have these schools make these information-based decisions. But the Canary Project really lives in the home after the school is out, because federal policy, thumbs up for that. But where we don't want federal policy is in our own private home. We're not trying to encourage the infringements of our constitutional rights. But what happens if a kid goes through a screenless day at school and then comes home and the parent hands them the phone and they just get 6 hours of doom scrolling? We're really unraveling the progress that we made earlier in the day if we're just giving that constant digital distraction back to the kid. So that's really the conversation that we're having with parents on what that balance within the household looks like after that kid comes back home from their day in school.
Yeah, that's power. And I think uh, part of the defeat of a lot of families is like, well, the kid uses it in school anyways, and so they need to. I want them to be able to do well in school, and and a basic tech literacy is important. So in a way, it can justify some of that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but if that's no longer the case in school, right, then good, they should feel emboldened, right, to then, but sometimes it is the opposite. And again, I understand, because it is oftentimes just a little bit easier. And I think with Christian schools, I mean, I sure hope I usually say, don't follow what the public school is doing, like, especially when it comes to pedagogy and curriculum. But in this case, I would probably say, hey, they're onto something there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And there's a lot of evidence. So hopefully doing that. And I know sometimes it's hard, right? Because you invested so much money in these, whatever, iPads or Chromebooks, right?
Totally.
And
Yeah.
so you don't want that to quote unquote go to waste, but there's obviously a bigger story here. I guess if you were to imagine kind of a healthy tech diet for a family, and I love your approach of like, no, we're not these purists that are like never use technology anymore, right? Like technology is a reality; it's part of our lives. But if there were a healthy tech diet, what would be its basic ingredients, and where would you encourage people to start? Obviously, the app that you mentioned is probably a great start. What are some things that you would tell parents kind of as a first step?
I like the framework and the analogy of diet, because it resonates with a lot of people. There are a lot of different diets, the Adkins, yada yada yada, but it all comes down to consumption, right? Like if you put it in the terminology of what we're doing to our bodies, like drink water. That's healthy. Our 78% of our body is made of water. It's essential for every human organism on the planet. But also, if you have too much water, you can drown and die, right? So it's all about the balance of that consumption. The same with our foods. Like whatever we ingest, if we're not mindful of it, it has negative impacts on this human vessel. So it's the same thing when it comes to the technology balance, the diet as well too. And it does come to the balance of that consumption. And so app challenge aside, one thing that we are hearing a lot from parents is they really don't know where to start. They don't even know what resources are available. And, going back to my previous career when it was my job to observe technology as it was rapidly developing, like it was my job and I couldn't keep up. So how am I going to expect a young family where the dad is going to work 40 to 60-hour work weeks and the mother has a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, and an 8-year-old, and she's cooking, she's taking them to soccer, doing class, raising a toddler. Like, how in the world do we expect parents to be fully informed or know where to go when it comes to having this conversation of where to even start? And so one thing that we do on our end is within the same app, we do have a resources page. And, we're living in a space that there are a lot of other faithful actors within the space too that have their own lane that they're focusing on. And parents may not know that there are features out there that like Bark, an app that you can put on your phone that you can limit how much time your child spends on social media. And so, hey, Johnny, we're just letting you have 1 hour on Instagram per day. You figure out when and how you want to use it. But when your hour is up, you're just done for the day. And so just knowing that there are other tools out there and resources to use, we have an entire resource page just to educate parents on uh, child settings with social media and things like that, where a parent can connect to a child's Snapchat to know their GPS coordinates. There's just like so many tools that parents don't even know exist. So whether they want to participate in the challenge or not, we feel like it's super important and significant on our end to make sure that there's a space that can be utilized for all these parents to come and have access to these resources, which they may otherwise not even know exist.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much out there, but sometimes it feels like it's there's a little bit everywhere, and I feel like with you guys, you have it in one place, right? And so, my humble opinion, first step, uh, go to the Canary Project, look at the resources, get a basic idea. Terry, where would they find that? What's your website? What's the easiest way to get in touch?
thecanaryproject.org, and that's where you can find us there. You can reach out, you can access the resources. All of the data and all the research that we put behind our app and our presentations are available there as well. We don't pretend that we live in the space as an expert in the medicine field. We're merely the messengers. Every single one of our daily tasks is supported by a research or a study done by someone far smarter than we are. And so if you're asking, why would Terry have us do this task today? You can select the why this works button right there underneath the task. And you'd be like, oh, this was a research study done by Harvard that they did over the past 10 years. It's kind of credible. Or this one's Utah State University. This one's from Oxford. So we don't pretend to play in that realm as experts, but we do utilize the resources of the people who live in that space professionally to have that supporting evidence for what we're doing at the Canary Project.
Amazing. So thecanaryproject.com, right?
.org.
.org. We'll put it in the research tab as well for the pod. Go check it out. Before I let you go, Terry, this has been fascinating, and I'm probably going to do a follow-up podcast here at some point because there's so much more to unpack. But I want to ask. We have talked a lot about technology, and I've got to talk about books, right? Because we're CLT, we kind of like books.
Yeah.
What what would you say is one text or one book that you can point our readers to that just had a tremendous impact on your life? Maybe a book you go back to, every year or so. But what's been kind of a really impactful
Oh,
text
man.
for you?
So many good ones come up. I think of Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I think of 12 Rules for Life, Jordan Peterson. Also, I'm still a Nietzsche fan. Beyond Good and Evil is still something I find my way back to. Nietzsche, has been criticized historically for, his mindset, his worldview, but some of his single sentences are so thought provoking that you could really spend just 10, 20 minutes just breaking that down and really understanding the depth of some of his content. He said that, as an author, he would rather be admired than famous. And so I think that shows in his work where he lived a life of poverty and was not known until many years after he passed away. And so his work is pretty profound, and I find myself naturally gravitating back to that on occasion when I really want a thought provoking comment or sentence just to really ponder over.
Might actually be a first on Anchored, a Nietzsche
Really?
recommendation. I love it. We feature Nietzsche on our test, and sometimes we get pushback, So
Interesting.
we can read authors with whom we disagree, right? In fact, we probably
Totally.
should do that a lot more often and talk to people with whom we disagree. And so love that. Thanks for sharing that, Terry. And thanks for all the work you and Danielle are doing. It's important. And I know it's going to provide a lot of value to our family. So go check out the Canary Project. And Terry, definitely come back to the Anchored podcast. But appreciate you, my friend.
Awesome. Thanks, Soren.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Anchored. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to leave a rating or review on your podcast platform of choice. And remember to subscribe and share with your friends and colleagues. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.